As you know, we are a poor country, and we have one of the biggest inequality rate in the world. How can we deal with that, making this huge change that you're proposing? Because, you know, a lot of people that don't have anything to do with the corruption or with the business system or with the regulated system,
Yeah.
how can we protect these people?
I'd say two things. One, forget about inequality. Inequality doesn't matter. What matters is poverty. Inequality doesn't matter. What the gap is doesn't matter. If everybody's doing better, the gap between them is irrelevant. It has no economic consequences, and it should have no social consequences. Focus on the issue of poverty. And the way you solve the issue of poverty is make it easy to start businesses. Make it easy to grow businesses. Again, if you get the government out of the way, there will be huge job creation. That is the best way to solve the issue of poverty. It's to give people jobs. If you get rid of the cronyism, if you get rid of the corruption, then people will earn wealth only if they produce value. There won't be the sense he's rich because he knows people in the government. Everybody say he's rich because he's producing something, he's creating a value. So the first thing to do is everything I said about separating the government from business. But the second thing to do is you've got to empower the poor in Brazil. And you empower the poor in Brazil by taking away all the barriers to them creating jobs and getting jobs. But the second way to do it...
What is, I'm just cutting you because what is the role of education? Because
It's big, but it's the next step. It's very hard to start with education because if you start with education, you're starting through the government schools, and government schools can never be improved significantly. So the way to solve the education problem is to privatize it, but that is hard, and that is difficult. The first thing you want to do is create economic opportunities. And one of the things I would do, and it's hard to do in Brazil, but I think it's necessary to do in Brazil, is you've got to give poor people property rights. So you've got favelas all over Brazil. Give them the ownership over the land. For example, I mean, I walked into a favela in Rio and went all the way up, right? They have the best views in the world. There's no more beautiful a city in the world than Rio de Janeiro. And the people in the favela on the top have the best views in the world. If they had property rights, if they owned the land, they would be rich, not poor. Because I mean, a lot of people would love to buy that land, would love to be there. And they would get the money, and they would go and start a business. They would go. So Hernando de Soto, the Peruvian economist, has a whole book about how property rights are so crucial for poor people, because then they can leverage that property rights to create capital, which then they can start businesses with and they create economic activity with. Brazil has this amazing opportunity. You've got millions and millions, tens of millions of people who live in these favelas. They don't own the property. Nobody owns the property. It's state property. What have you got? You lose zero. You lose nothing by giving them that land, by giving them ownership and making them owners of something, which creates self-esteem and creates capital. So I think there are lots of opportunities to deal with poverty in Brazil that are not being taken advantage of, that unfortunately nobody's talking about for all kinds of political and philosophical reasons. And to really solve the problem. And of course, as an economy grows, look at China. China over the last 30, 40 years has brought almost 1 billion people out of poverty. How? Just freeing up business. Just they don't redistribute wealth, they don't have welfare, they just liberalize business. Brazil is in a much better situation than China is to do that. And they didn't invest in education. They're investing in education after the fact. And education, at the end of the day, the only way to solve that problem, and we have the same problem in America, and I think all over the world, is to privatize it.
You know, Mr. Brook, I used to think that I am a liberal, but hearing you, I'm far away from that.